Hi, Jean Schnupp here. Welcome to another of the new Savvy Sightseer video vacation series. In this segment, we'll visit an interesting cross section of massive and beautiful castles and palaces from several different countries and eras that are sure to fascinate you. We'll start with the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg, Russia, and its famous and mysterious Amber Room. Then we'll go west to the Alhambra, the massive 13th century castle complex in Spain, written about so passionately by American author Washington Irving. And we'll head north to France and Marie Antoinette's Petit Trianon, a mini palace on the grounds of the Palace of Versailles. We'll follow that up with zipping up to Scotland and Stirling Castle, home of Mary Queen of Scots and a British stronghold during the Jacobite Rebellion. Back in France, we'll stop in at the Chateau de Chenonceau, a sumptuous castle of the ladies in the Loire Valley. Not done yet, we're then off to England and Blenheim Palace, the British home made great by American Consuelo Vanderbilt's marriage and dowry to the Duke of Marlborough. And we'll wind up in Bavaria because no look at castles and palaces would be complete without Neuschwanstein, dubbed the Cinderella Castle, perched atop the mountains of Germany. So buckle up for our sweeping adventure across Europe, visiting fantastical real-life residences. The Catherine Palace is named for Catherine I, wife of Peter the Great, who had commissioned a modest two-story building for her in 1717 in Pushkin, near St. Petersburg. Peter had moved the realm's capital there from Moscow a few years earlier. Their daughter, Empress Elizabeth, had grander plans for the summer residence, though, and in 1743 she had the building reconstructed. The resultant palace, completed in 1756, is over 1,000 feet long, with elaborately decorated blue and white facades featuring multiple sculptures and trimmed with over 200 pounds of gold. Elizabeth's fiancé had died before their wedding, so she remained single and heirless during her reign. She selected her nephew, another Peter, to be her heir. She also chose for him a wife, the Princess Sophie, who was a daughter of an obscure German prince. The marriage and new position required Sophie to convert to the Russian Orthodox Church and change her name to Catherine II in memory of Elizabeth's mother. The 5 golden domes of the palace chapel dominate one wing of the massive building. Onion domes on Russian Orthodox churches often appear in groups of 3, representing the Holy Trinity, or 5, as here, additionally representing Jesus Christ and the evangelists. Elizabeth had been criticized by some for being too excessive in her embellishments of the palace. The Great Hall, or Bright Gallery as it was called in the 18th century, is certainly a place of excess. The stylish hall is the largest stateroom in the palace, with a floor area of about 56 feet wide and over 150 feet long. That's over 8,600 square feet. Just imagine the elaborate outfits that would have been on display here during official banquets, balls, and masquerades. When Elizabeth died, the throne passed to her nephew as Peter III. His reign lasted just a few months when the unpopular Peter abdicated to his wife Catherine II and was murdered shortly after under questionable circumstances. His wife may or may not have been involved. At 33, Catherine became Empress of Russia in 1762 and ruled until 1796, the country's longest ruling female leader. She became known as Catherine the Great. Despite being one of those who had called her predecessor reckless for lavish spending on the palace, Catherine II wanted to put her own stamp on it and hired Scottish architect Charles Cameron. Over the course of 15 years, he made several renovations, including her personal apartments. He had a penchant for classical symmetry and a superb taste for color. For the bedroom of Catherine's choice of a wife for her son, Paul, Cameron decorated the walls with relief compositions on motifs taken from Pompeian murals. The plaster medallions depicted metaphorical scenes representing health, happiness, and prosperity, perfect for the future Empress Consort of Russia. In the Chinese blue drawing room, Cameron combined elements of a classical interior with motifs from Chinese decorative art, which was all the rage at the time. Catherine instructed Cameron to create an arcade for strolling and philosophical discussion. He delighted her with the supremely elegant building that was also designed to offer the best possible views over the surrounding park. He built this magnificent staircase as a graceful entry to the colonnade. Today, the Cameron Gallery houses temporary exhibitions. By far, the most famous room in the palace is the Amber Room. The original was created between 1701 and 1713 for Friedrich Wilhelm, the first king of Prussia. The room was later gifted to Peter the Great in exchange for a treaty between Russia and Prussia. Peter told Empress Catherine of this bargain, "The king has made me the elegant present, the Amber Room which I have long desired." The Amber Room was packed up and shipped to Russia in 18 large boxes. Initially, it was installed in the Winter House in St. Petersburg, but moved again when Elizabeth wanted it for her Catherine Palace. In the end, the collection contained over 6 tons of amber and other semi-precious stones. The amber panels were backed with gold leaf, and historians estimate that, at the time, the room, which covered about 180 square feet, was worth 142 million in today's dollars. In a desperate attempt to save the Amber Room from invading Nazis in 1941, the room was wallpapered over, but German troops looking for the treasure quickly found it. The room was dismantled, crated, and moved, but their final fate is unknown. From 1941 to 44, Nazis went to extraordinary lengths to deface or destroy Russia's palaces. The Catherine Palace was especially devastated. Soldiers drove heavy equipment through its rooms, tearing up parquet floors of precious woods. They used priceless paintings and marble busts for target practice, and exquisite furniture as firewood. The final assault was dynamiting the palace. Rebuilding seemed impossible, and given the general poverty of the country, to do so seemed impractical. But for the Russian people, victory over the Nazis would not be complete until the palaces embodying their history and heritage were rebuilt as a testimony of the nation's resilience. The Catherine Palace reopened in 1959, but restoration projects are still continuing today. The exact recreation of the Amber Room took 70 artisans and scholars, reinventing lost crafts and techniques over 20 years at a cost of more than 12 million to complete. It was opened to great fanfare in 2003 by President Vladimir Putin to celebrate the 300-year anniversary of the founding of St. Petersburg. To this day, treasure hunters are still searching for the mysterious Amber Room, but they do so at their own risk and should be aware of the Amber Room curse. Many hunters of the room have met untimely ends. Moving over to Spain, we find the last fortification of the Moorish kingdom at Granada, the Alhambra complex. It was built on the remains of a 9th century Roman fortification. It was constructed between 1238 and 1358 for the Nasrid dynasty, the last Muslims to rule in Spain. Situated in the northwestern foothills of the Sierra Nevada, the palatial area was the domain of the Sultan and his closest family. It was renovated, expanded, restored, and rebuilt over several centuries, and it served as a home, a fortress, a ruling center, even a garrison. Essentially, it was a walled city. 1 mile of walls and 30 towers enclosed several palaces, up to 7 at one time, as well as courtyards and gardens within. In all, the palace, fortress, courtyard, gardens, and forest totaled over 75 acres of land. From floor to ceiling throughout this castle, stucco walls are detailed yet delicate, with calligraphy carvings paying homage to the Muslim faith. This is the largest and grandest room in the Comares Palace. The Sultan reigned supreme here in the Hall of the Ambassadors, also known as the throne room, where he would sit upon blue and gold cushions to receive emissaries. It was also the scene of the last Sultan's greatest defeat, when the keys of the Alhambra were handed over to the Christians on January 1st, 1492. The honeycombed look of this ceiling is in the Two Sisters Hall. The style is the muqabara, a style of vaulting that was popular throughout the Islamic world. Everywhere, symmetry is evident. 5,000 prismatic pieces were used to create a celestial explosion, as noted historian Robert Irwin describes it. The dome was designed to catch and reflect the shifting light of the sun or the moon. Geometrically laid out water conduits are a common sight at the Alhambra. Water was carefully controlled. The flow was such that it would not ripple, and pillars would be perfectly reflected. A palace courtyard served as a vital function. It was the core of family life, from which the other rooms radiated. This 111-foot-long, placid pool along the lush green myrtle bushes provided striking contrasts of colors and made the Court of the Myrtles an ideal backdrop for sultans to receive and entertain guests. The Palace of the Lions was a private area for the king, his family, and his mistresses. The Sultan had 4 wives and 4 concubines. The 12 lion fountain originally was a water clock, with a different lion spewing to mark the hour. Water flows out from the fountain to each adjoining room. It also symbolizes the streams of paradise flowing to the 4 corners of the earth. When the sultans wanted to get away from the official affairs of the palace, they had somewhere else to go for relaxation, without actually going very far. About a 15-minute walk away is the Honor Life, strictly a leisure palace for the kings of Granada. Its intimate and peaceful atmosphere was what they were looking for when they retired to these gardens to rest. In spite of it being so close to the Alhambra, it is considered to be outside the city proper. Again, water is a predominant feature, with a 150-foot-long canal that irrigates lush ornamental and agricultural gardens. The splashing fountains, disrupting the calm water in contrast to the designed calm of the Court of the Myrtles, were added by the Christian inhabitants. Perched above the complex, the sultans could keep their eye on the palace and the city laid out below. Although the mighty Alhambra could not be overthrown, it did, however, succumb to a siege in 1492 at the conclusion of the Christian reconquest. When victorious Catholic rulers, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, first entered Granada after the siege, they reportedly marveled at the beauty of the fortified palace of Alhambra and the treasures it contained, and they made it their royal court. It was here that Christopher Columbus received the royal endorsement for his expedition that led to the discovery of the Americas for Spain. The palace also took the heart of their grandson, Charles V, who honeymooned here. He is reported to have exclaimed, "Ill-fated the man who lost all this." He and his new bride planned to make it one of their primary homes, and in the 1520s he commissioned an extravagant royal palace to be built next to the Alhambra in order to be able to enjoy its wonders but live in more modern digs for the time. It was not meant to be, and he died before it was completed. In 1812, some of the complex's towers were blown up by the French during the Peninsular War. It lay in ruins for years until the American writer Washington Irving took up residence at the Alhambra Palace in 1829, despite its abandoned state. He was there to write some of the material for a book. He romanticized the setting, and when his Tales of the Alhambra, Palace of Mystery and Splendor, hit the bookshelves in 1832, tourists started flocking to the region. Restoration projects got going, and in 1984, the Alhambra was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Grenadans are very grateful to Irving, who had served as an ambassador from America to Spain from 1842 to 1846, and they showed their appreciation in multiple ways. Inside the castle, a plaque commemorates Irving's work, and in the Alhambra forest stands a statue of the author, erected in 2009 on the 150th anniversary of his death. Irving had viewed the complex as an exotic place within Europe, full of tales and mystery. On the very first page of his famous book, his enthusiasm is clearly evident. How many legends and traditions, true and fabulous, how many songs and ballads of love and war and chivalry are associated with this oriental pile, he wrote. Now we go north to France. Literally a place for fantasy and escape, the Petit Trianon is tucked away in a corner of the lavish estate of Versailles, just 12 miles outside of Paris, the capital of France. Young Marie Antoinette disliked the strict etiquette of Versailles and distrusted the people and layers of palace intrigue. She preferred to run off to the much smaller chateau, given to her by her husband, Louis XVI, as a gift. It had originally been built by Louis XV for his influential mistress, Madame de Pompadour, who died before she could ever inhabit it. So it is Marie Antoinette who is most associated with this charming chateau. She craved a quiet and simple escape, but she still wanted to do it in style. The beautiful limestone staircase has gilded iron handrails. The symbols in the center portion are the monogram of Marie Antoinette. Her bedroom wasn't just for sleeping. She would have intimate gatherings here as well. The bed is a reconstruction, but the embroidered upholstery is all original. The furniture had been auctioned off in October of 1793, a few days before Marie Antoinette was executed. With the exception of the bed, the rest of the set was tracked down and bought back in 1945. Marie enjoyed personalizing the mini palace and chose the decor herself. The Trianon interiors are a polar opposite of Versailles' heavy opulence. She instead favored pale greens, blues, and pinks. During her childhood in Vienna, to pass the time, royals and their guests would put together shows. Marie Antoinette, who had more than a dozen siblings, missed these family performances and wanted to do the same with her new close relations. So in 1780, she had a theater built. The Queen's Theater is the only building on the estate to have survived fully intact and unchanged since the 18th century. The Queen watched private performances here, but also took to the stage herself to entertain up to 250 royal family and friends. The vast stage has 8 layers with additional floors above and below the main stage. The orchestra pit can fit 20 musicians. Its interior was constructed primarily of wood for acoustic reasons and decorated to look like marble. The stage machinery, considered state of the art in the 18th century, survived along with a number of original sets. In 1997, $700,000 was raised to restore the theater. The work took several years to plan and just over a year to complete, and was finally opened to the public on a limited basis in October 2001. Entrance to the Petit Trianon was invitation only. Even the king couldn't show up unannounced. That way Marie could walk freely around the grounds and really relax. Depending on her mood of the day, she could stroll through the French gardens, characterized by rigid and geometric forms. Or she could wander over to the English gardens, where she had the Temple of Love monument, set on an island in the river and installed with a direct sight line from her bedroom. In the center of the 12-colonnade pavilion is a sculpture of Cupid. Above all, her favorite garden was known as the Queen's Hamlet, a small country village constructed for her to enjoy the pleasures of the countryside with her children. 12 cottages, along with vegetable and flower gardens, were built around a man-made lake. Nearby was a working farm, where reportedly Marie carried out the fantasy of being a mere milkmaid, not the disliked Queen of France. On to Scotland now, and to reminders of the era when kings and clans ruled the land. The best preserved fortress home from the early 12th century is Stirling Castle, at the intersection of Scotland's Low and Highlands. A 10-year, £12 million project restored it to its stunning Renaissance glory. Splendidly decorated and furnished, it recalls the years when it was the childhood home of Mary, Queen of Scots. It is easy to conjure up images of James V striding halls or walking the courtyard, or his daughter Mary on her way to being crowned the Queen of Scots. Almost every Scottish monarch either lived in the castle, was crowned, and or died here. The stark stone fortress is dramatically set off by the distinctive yellow building of the Great Hall. The palace is loaded with statues. About 250 dot the castle facade and grounds. Some are remarkably grotesque sculptures with devils and odd animals. Placed around the outer wall, these seemingly threaten that James V meant business and could be a dangerous adversary. It was certainly a daunting fortress, perched high above the town on volcanic rock with steep cliffs on 3 sides. James evidently believed the adage, "He who holds Stirling holds Scotland," and doomed it to be forever contested piece of territory between the British and the English. On the courtyard side, there is a more benign look, and sculptures here take the form of Roman gods and symbols that tout James V's perceived attributes, a leader who will bring prosperity, peace, and harmony to Scotland. In addition to being a fearsome-looking castle, James also wanted it to be the envy of every other leader. Inside the Great Hall, the largest of its kind ever built in Scotland, you can just picture the place filled with hundreds of people celebrating grandly staged festivities. It could fit in 500 for an event. In 1594, a banquet held in the hall for the baptism of Prince Henry was so lavish that the fish course was served from an enormous wooden ship complete with firing cannons. While the outside was designed to be formidable, the interior was designed for leisure and comfort, with much more welcoming features like this huge fireplace in the Queen's outer chamber. Above it is the Scottish coat of arms. The unicorn on the left is an important symbol, in fact is prominently on Scottish royal crests. The unicorn is considered a national animal of Scotland, symbolizing ruling through harmony, purity, benevolence, and virtue. The eagle on the right signifies fair judgment, understanding, and strength. Only the Queen's most important visitors were invited into her bedchamber. The great state bed, though, was symbolic. She actually slept in a small room nearby. Her maid is said to haunt the castle still. The girl had a premonition one night that if her queen fell asleep, she would not live to see the dawn. The maid lit a candle, and put it by the queen's bed, then fell asleep to wake up to the room in flames. She got the queen out, but the maid died of her injuries, and now the Green Lady roams the halls, still dressed in her green nightgown. A sighting of her is feared as a harbinger of doom, death, and despair. The castle is also reportedly haunted by a Highlander, dressed in full Scottish style with a kilt. He is often mistaken for a tour guide, and stories have been told of visitors approaching him only for him to turn away and disappear before their eyes. Around the walls of the Queen's inner hall and throne room, you see Sterling's amazing 7-part tapestry called The Mystic Hunt of the Unicorn. A project to replicate the originals, now in the Metropolitan Museum of New York, took £2 million and 14 years. Tapestries were decorative and kept inhabitants warm, but showing off wall after wall covered in wildly expensive Belgian tapestry also screamed wealth. An inventory shows James V owned over 100 tapestries. The king definitely had a thing for unicorns and color, like this ceiling in his bedchamber. We are moving from one of Mary, Queen of Scots' homes to another, this one in France, to one of the most beautiful and fanciful palaces in the Loire River Valley in the country's midsection. The gardens that Diane de Poitiers designed at Chateau de Chenonceau were considered to be the most spectacular and modern of the 16th century. The property was a gift of her lover, King Henry II of France. She transformed a modest castle to a beautiful estate, with one alteration that proved to be a fortuitous and historic addition. She built a bridge from the main castle, leftward in this picture, over the river Cher to the forest on the other side. She was ultimately evicted by the king's widow, the powerful Catherine de' Medici, who then made her own changes, most notably extending the castle itself over the bridge. The addition included a massive ballroom. The palace became the seat of power for de' Medici when she ruled France as regent on behalf of her young son, Francis II. With this view as she worked in the castle turret library, it's hard to believe anything got done amid such a tranquil setting, much less the business of running a nation. The bridge and its 200-foot-long ballroom played significant roles in the chateau's and France's history. When de' Medici's son, Francis II, married Mary, Queen of Scots, in 1560, they celebrated the event at the chateau. Later, in 1733, the estate was acquired by a wealthy squire named Claude Dupin. His wife, Louise, founded a literary center at Chenonceau, attracting brilliant minds of the era, such as Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. When the French Revolution broke out and rioters threatened to destroy the chateau as a symbol of royal excess, Louise reminded the mob that it was the only bridge crossing the river for many miles, and she also invited the revolutionaries to use the ballroom, an offer they happily did not refuse. During World War I, the chateau was owned by a prosperous chocolatier family who turned it into a hospital and treated thousands of French soldiers. And in World War II, the ballroom was used to smuggle escapees. By a quirk of fate, the Cher running beneath the ballroom constituted the line of demarcation, the wartime boundary between free on the forested south side of the river and occupied France on the north side. As in Sterling, tapestries were prominent features of the chateau. They kept out winter chills, added a decorative touch, and served as displays of wealth and power. Some tell the tale of daily life at the chateau, others detail historic occasions or religious themes. These, lining the bedroom of Catherine de' Medici, go all the way from the beautiful Renaissance clay tile floor to the magnificent coffered wood ceilings. This overly dramatic fireplace displays royal personal emblems. The salamander on the left, with its mythic powers, represents immortality, rebirth, passion, and it was the sign of King Francis I of France. The stoat, or ermine, on the right was for his wife, Queen Claude. It was the symbol of Brittany, of which she was a duchess, and it also signified an uncompromising integrity of personal honor. When de' Medici died, the castle passed into the hands of her late son's widow, Louise of Lorraine. The grieving Queen Dowager never coped with her husband's assassination and went into deep mourning at Chenonceau, spending her days mostly in her dreary room, meditating and praying. Louise, dubbed the White Queen because royal protocol at the time dictated white as her wardrobe, filled the gloomy room with symbols of mourning, like gravediggers' shovels, crowns of thorns and endless teardrops. Her death marked the end of royal presence at Chenonceau. On a way more cheerful note, the kitchens of Chenonceau are a must-see part of the chateau. Built into the bases of the first two piers of the bridge, supplies could be quickly and discreetly delivered by river via a ladder and small platform where boats could tie up. Spanning several areas, the kitchens, pantry, butchery with hooks for hanging game, enormous chopping blocks, herb centers, and giant larders are considered to be among the finest examples of Renaissance kitchens in the world. Gleaming molds and pans could suit every recipe for sumptuous feasts. A wood-fired oven and stove took up a good portion of one of the kitchens. Chenonceau is second only to Versailles as the most visited estate in France. And now to England, and the only home permitted to be called a palace that does not belong to a royal family. In the early 1700s, General John Churchill was hailed as a war hero for his victory over the French and Bavarians at the Battle of Blenheim, and he was rewarded mightily. A very grateful Queen Anne ordered a palace, usually a residence reserved for monarchs and chiefs of state, to be built as a gift to the general. She generously added to the 11,000-acre land grant a cash payout of £240,000. And as if that wasn't recompense enough, she threw in a title and he became the first Duke of Marlborough. About 60 miles northwest of England's capital, London, Blenheim is the largest home in England that is still family owned and lived in. The only historic house named a UNESCO World Heritage Site is best known as the birthplace of Winston Churchill. His father was a younger brother of the Duke at the time, and his parents were visiting in 1874 when his mother, Jenny Jerome, an American, went into labor. It is often a backdrop for filming, like for Cinderella, Harry Potter, James Bond, and a whole bunch more. In 2018, an unusual discovery was made at the Grand Bridge on the estate when lakes were being drained to shore up the now unstable structure as part of a £12 million restoration. It turns out the bridge was originally intended to be a habitable viaduct, but noted landscape architect Capability Brown had a different vision, and more than 30 rooms were flooded so he could create the lakes in the 1760s. During excavation, the ground floor rooms, with fireplaces and chimneys and a large windowless chamber that appears to be a theater or ballroom, were discovered. Capability Brown also oversaw much of the development of the estate's 2,100-acre parkland. The grounds include different styles of gardens: formal, herb and lavender, and pleasure, complete with a hedge maze, butterfly house, and giant chess set. These water terraces and Italian garden are considered the ninth Duke's legacy to the palace. He had a long slope between the house and lake transformed over a 6-year period in the late 1920s. It took 20 workers to move 25,000 cubic yards of earth. The sense of wide open space is completely counter to the overall sense of clutter in the palace itself. It seems the family likes to be surrounded by reminders of their predecessors with massive portraits, like here in the red drawing room. An eye-catching feature is a set of elegant red Victorian chaperone sofas flanking the fireplace. The corner seat was for chaperones to be separate and discreet, yet present, to ensure there were no unseemly going on between their charges on the sofa. In the first stateroom, tribute is paid to Consuelo Vanderbilt, the American heiress largely responsible for today's grand look of Blenheim. She had been pushed into marriage to Charles Spencer Churchill, the ninth Duke of Marlborough, in 1895 by her overbearing mother, who wanted to add a British title to the family's attributes. For his part, the Duke was interested only in her dowry, guaranteed to restore what had become a downtrodden old estate and turn it into a showcase. Both were unhappy with the arrangement and finally dissolved the marriage. He then promptly married his mistress, Gladys. The 187-room palace must have felt like a gilded cage to Consuelo, who was only 18 when she was married off. Her arrangement was something of a trend at the time. Young American heiresses, rich with new money but rejected by established high society, turned their sights to Europe, seeking status through marriage and lofty European titles. They were dubbed with a different, not very flattering title though, Dollar Princesses or Dollar Duchesses. Fans of Downton Abbey will recognize that plotline. So Consuelo became a duchess and lived in a grand home her money was restoring and was altogether miserable. Here in the Green Writing Room, the famous Battle of Blenheim is played out across enormous tapestries on 3 walls. A sculpture of Queen Anne stands as a permanent reminder to future generations that they owe her a debt of gratitude for her largesse in giving the Churchills the estate. She presides over the Long Library, a simple but accurate name for the 183-foot long room filled with more than 10,000 books, including many first editions. Also memorialized is Sir Winston Churchill in an exhibit opened in 2015. Artifacts on display include his uniform, letters, notes for famous speeches, the bed in which he was born, and a plaque noting Blenheim was a place he loved. The exhibit shows a different side of the Prime Minister, whose gruff and commanding presence dominated World War II. A focus here is the emotional side of him, when he was struck dumb with love at first sight upon meeting Clementine Hosier at a party. Reportedly, the great orator was so tongue-tied he couldn't manage to ask her to dance. Years later, they met again, and he was a much more talkative person then. He proposed to her on the grounds of Blenheim, and a month later they married and started a romantic journey that spanned 56 years. Churchill is buried near Blenheim, in the village of Bladden. Now on to our final stop, and perhaps one of the most photographed and recognizable castles in the world, and the man who envisioned it. In 1864, Ludwig II acceded to the Bavarian throne. He was just 18, though, unprepared and inexperienced. He was considered quite a ladies' man and dubbed the King of Hearts, but he backed out of his arranged marriage, and it is believed he may have had a relationship with Richard Wagner, the composer Ludwig idolized for his epic mythical operas. Ludwig was obsessed with the medieval image of the Holy Roman emperors who ruled a holy kingdom by the grace of God. He was born a bit late for that, though. The empire dissolved in the early 1800s, so in reality he was just a constitutional monarch, a head of state with rights and duties, but little freedom of action. So he built a fantasy world around him, in which, far removed from reality, he could feel like he was a real king. And he came to be known as Mad King Ludwig. He had a thing for castles and palaces, driving his country deeper and deeper in debt, and was harshly criticized by his advisors for his lavish spending. They finally reached a breaking point with his most extravagant palace venture, the beautiful Neuschwanstein in today's Germany. It was his most opulent palace, bringing to life Ludwig's fanciful dream for a castle built in the authentic style of the old German knights' castles. It's reportedly the inspiration for Disney's Cinderella Castle. Actually, lavish is an understatement. It took 14 woodcarvers 4.5 years on his intricately carved bed alone. Embellishments throughout the castle are definitely over the top. Chandeliers were all designed as ornate crowns, reminiscent of the images in his father's hunting lodge of Byzantine-era kings who became saints. The throne room's chandelier is the biggest, weighing in at 1 ton. Ludwig said he wanted to live on the lofty heights, breathing the air of heaven. And he liked to look downhill at one of his father's homes, Hohenschwangau Castle. In 1833, King Maximilian II had taken the ruins of a centuries-old castle and reproduced the original medieval atmosphere. The summer hunting residence was a favorite of his son Ludwig II, but being surrounded by its art, inspired by fairy tales and medieval legends, including the legend of the swan knight Lohengrin, may have been a bit warping for the young boy. Ludwig identified himself with Lohengrin, to whom Richard Wagner dedicated a romantic opera in 1850 and commissioned lifelike artworks of the saga scenes to line his castle walls. After 17 years of building, Ludwig moved in when it was only about 1/3 finished, but he only lived in it for about 6 months when he died mysteriously by drowning, within days of being declared mentally incompetent to rule. The Bavarian government didn't wait long to start refilling the treasury and threw open its doors to tourists pretty much before his body was even cold, at about 6 weeks later. I hope you've enjoyed this tour of real-life castles and palaces of Europe, and I like to end all of my programs with the words of Dr. Seuss. Sometimes you don't appreciate the moment until it becomes a memory, and I like to add to that to say, always remember to celebrate the moments and treasure the memories. To see more of these castles and palaces, or any of my European destinations, go to my website. You can find most of them under the links for different countries. If you have any questions about this program, email me or use the contact page on my website. When libraries are again offering programs. You can check my programs tab to see where I'll be. Until then, visit the library site for more video vacations by Savvy Sightseer.